So, um, the world's going fucking insane, and I thought I had a pretty simple physiological explanation as to why this is happening, right? So, to begin, right, the human body, specifically the human brain, is an amazing thing, okay, right? It operates in ways that you're probably not aware of every single day. So, to start off, right, I've made this little diagram here. Not sure if you can really read it, right? But you have your brain, right? And if we could really simplify things, your brain is basically broken down into hardware and software, right? So the hardware would be the actual physical nerves, your actual physical brain itself, right? Now, the software would be the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, right? So now, the central nervous system, that's what you're aware of. That's like who you are, like all your actions, because the central nervous system is voluntary. You can almost consider that like your desktop. It's essentially like hopping onto your laptop, you see a widget, or you hop onto your phone, you see an application button, you press it, boom. That's your CNS because you have control of it, right? Then we have our ANS, right? Or our autonomic nervous system, right? Now this one's involuntary, right? It's essentially responsible for back-end functions, right? So you can consider like breathing, your heart pumping, everything to that extent, right? That's all basically the responsibility of your ANS, right? I'm being careful right now because I got my camera on a tripod. It's unstable. It might fall, so I might have to do this real quick. But anyhow, the ANS itself is actually broke down into two separate parts, right? So in your ANS, you have the sympathetic system and you have the parasympathetic system, right? Now, in opposition to how they're named, right? The sympathetic system is actually responsible for action, and the parasympathetic system is responsible for relaxation. They actually work together, right? Like they work against each other because they're foils, right? To manage your internal systems, right? But both systems are essentially always working, right? So they also are responsible for different parts of your body, right? So for example, like I said, sympathetic's action, parasympathetic's relaxation, right? So with your eyes, the sympathetic part will essentially dilate your eyes so you can focus, right? Because you can consider the sympathetic part of your autonomic nervous system responsible for fight or flight. So that's why it's responsible for action, right? So with your eyes, the sympathetic part of your brain is essentially going to get them to focus more, be able to look further, right? On the opposite, the parasympathetic is probably going to get them to relax, right? So same thing with salivary glands, the heart, lungs, stomach, liver, kidneys, intestines, and bladder. These are very important organs, right? That the autonomic system are responsible. Reason why I say that, right, is that essentially it's really important for your brain or for your nervous system to have a balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. Reason being is you can develop pathologies if one or the other is basically is overactive, right? So this is where in my opinion, stress response, and trauma become incredibly important, right? So if you really consider it, right, sympathetic is responsible for action. So anytime you get stressed, your sympathetic system turns on, right? So stress can be anything. Stress can be physical stress. It can be emotional stress. It can be anything across the board, right? Whenever you get stressed, understand your sympathetic system turns on, and it basically forces action in your eyes, salivary gland, heart, lungs, stomach, liver, kidneys, intestines, and bladder, okay? Opposite thing with the parasympathetic system, right? So if you're understimulated, right, your parasympathetic system is going to be active because it's responsible for relaxation, right? Now, why is this pertinent to trauma and stress? If you are traumatized or if you are consistently stressed, you will be in an overactive sympathetic state, right? Essentially, you're going to be in a constant action state. Now, the way your body actually is able to stay in this state, because action requires fuel, you use cortisol. Cortisol essentially is a format of adrenaline. It's a hormone that's basically used in a stress scenario for your body to essentially be able to have more energy, right? Now, the issue with cortisol is that in small amounts, cortisol is actually useful. Over the long term, though, cortisol is extremely detrimental to basically all functions of your body. It's actually cytotoxic over the long term, so it can actually be negative to your human cells, right? And here's what I'm thinking we're at right now. I think if you consider what I'm trying to say here, right? So if the sympathetic system gets activated by stress, right, and basically turns on your fight or flight system, right, and if it's on for too long, you experience pathologies. I want you to consider us over the last 2 years, since 2020, that we have been in an unhuman amount of stress, or it's an extremely atypical amount of stress. And I think it's everybody across the board. Citizens, policymakers, everyone has been dealing with some level of tumult, right? And I think we're seeing the results of that now, right? I believe that a lot of individuals, especially decision makers across the board, right? A lot of people you may know, your family members, everybody, they have essentially been in an overstimulated sympathetic state, right? Essentially, they're extremely stressed. Their thought process isn't working well. Like, so if you think about it, like their eyes, salivary gland. Okay, so let's actually slow it down. In an oversympathetic state, your eyes, you can't really see like periphery because your eyes are dilated, so you're focused on the target or the risk, right? Your salivary gland, basically, so your salivary gland, I believe when you notice that this food coming, this is like the Pavlovian response. It basically turns on like saliva. So when you're not when you're in the sympathetic state, right? What's gonna happen is that your salivary gland is gonna shut down because you're not interested in eating right now. Your body's like, yo, we gotta take all the energy right now and either fight or flight. Like, we're not eating right now, bro. We need this energy, right? The heart, because basically you're gonna need more energy right now. The heart starts pumping. It starts going, right? Heart, so then you think about elevated heart pressure, right? Think of just in general heart-based pathologies, right? When because your sympathetic system is essentially overactive. Consider lungs, especially lungs, right? So the reason why your lungs get activated during your sympathetic system is because it's thinking, okay, I gotta run or I gotta fight someone, so I need more oxygen in my system. So you start pumping, right? And like that's even the idea of like hyperventilation, right? Lungs, stomach. So because you have to fight or flight, right? Your stomach shuts down. You don't digest food as well because your body's not interested in digesting that. Digesting food, that's something that's responsible for the parasympathetic system, right? Liver, kidneys. So again, you have to consider when you're in an oversympathetic state, your liver and kidneys are going to be experiencing large amounts of stress. There's going to be pathologies there as well too. Intestines, right? All correlated. Bladder, all correlated. And really, it's really, for me, I have heard across the board people dealing with all of these issues over the last 2 years. And it makes a lot of sense. But I think the most important one, right, is what it really does to your cognitive functioning, right? So really consider this. Really consider if you're constantly stressed, if you're constantly in a fight or flight state, you're going to be in a biased perspective, right? Because you're constantly concerned. You're not going to see the full picture. You're going to see what you perceive as danger, right? And again, I say this is my thesis. This is happening to everybody right now. This is happening to me. This is happening to your neighbor. This is happening to policymakers. This is happening to everybody. This is why I've really been pushing presentness, being very present, right? Like, we need to do a firm analysis of where you're at right now. Why do I say this again? Presentness can really help you. If you have an oversympathetic system, right? It's an overactive sympathetic system. It's because your body or your mind, your brain thinks you're constantly at risk, but you're not. You need to understand that to be able to actually relax. I can't make you do that. That's a whole different, conversation in itself, right? But at the end of the day, I think this is what's happening with everybody right now. With everybody. And I'll be interested in hearing if anybody agrees with that.